Being real. Oh, sorry. Good morning. I'm going to call the October 31st Policy Committee meeting to order. I have a couple changes to the agenda. I would like to add a couple things. First, I would like to take 5B off Policy 3-5. We have to do a little more work to it, and it'll come back next month. I would like to add a closed session for a consultation with our attorney. And I would like to add a number 7 and then change adjournment to 8 for discussion for drug testing of student athletes and extracurricular. So I will entertain a motion to approve the amended agenda.
So moved.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Okay, approval of the September 26, 2018 open session minutes.
Motion to approve.
Second. All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Okay, policies for second review.
Yes, you have, sorry. Thank you, Dr. Land. Good morning. You have policies 3-1, 3-3, 3-6, and 3-16 before you for a second review. I've received no recommendations aside from the ones we discussed at the last meeting, which I've incorporated, but nothing since the board meeting, and would request that these go to the board meeting in November for approval.
What about your new policy?
E2.
Oh, E, that's the same thing. I'm sorry.
Yep.
That's with the same, that one went before the board as well.
Okay, I will entertain a motion to send policy 3-1, policy 3-3, 3-6, 3-16, and new proposed policy to the full board for approval, right?
Yes, please.
Motion to send to the full board.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Okay.
Okay.
Review.
First review.
We're continuing to work through Chapter 3, and we have several before you. The first is the evaluation of licensed employees. And we have Dr. Barnes here if you have any questions.
I do.
He has reviewed these, and Dr. Barnes, if you want to come up here, that'd be helpful.
Oh,
Go ahead. The changes in this one are, this was not revised since the evaluation for employees procedures have changed, and so the changes were to make it consistent with the evaluation system that is currently in place.
Okay. It says the superintendent or designee shall evaluate principals and assistant principals. Who currently does that?
The school performance office.
So the chief academic officer now?
In his department.
In his
yes.
department. So
And
somebody in his department, the directors or somebody is doing the actual. Okay. I just have.
And the principal does the assistant principal.
Does the assistant principal.
The principal, okay. And it says that the principal does the teachers'
Correct.
reviews. Is it the principal or designee? Could it be the assistant principal? Do we need
It could be.
It's usually the
designee in there?
principal or
We
assistant
can
principal.
clarify that.
Okay.
Yeah. Where's that exactly? Front page?
I have it for you. I'll hand it to you because
Okay.
I have there's some duplicative sentences in here
Okay.
too. The annual evaluation of principals and assistant principals must include a mid-year review. Do we do that currently?
Yes, ma'am. The NISA system that we use has kind of a setup structure where they go through a process of setting goals, reviewing those, mid-year review, and then an end-of-the-year summary.
So everything that is in here is stuff we currently do. Nothing is new to the
Correct.
evaluation system. We're just putting more stuff around it.
Yeah,
Okay.
we just didn't have it put in place
Okay.
in the policy.
Okay, great. I just have the designee change just to let you
Okay.
guys know. And then there's a couple places where we duplicated
Okay.
stuff.
Thank you.
Does anyone else have anything?
I do not.
Okay. What?
Yeah,
Oh,
well,
yeah. Because it messes up when you do the red line.
Right.
Yeah.
And we always do that at the end because it does
Yes.
make it.
Okay.
So we would ask that that one go to the board. Do you want to vote on them all at once?
We might as well
Okay.
vote. Do you want to vote
Okay.
individually?
or do it all together?
All together,
We'll
which
do it
fine
all
with me.
together.
Okay.
Is that okay with you,
Mhm.
Candace? All together? Okay.
Okay, we
Next one,
tabled
3-5A, because we tabled 3-5.
3-5A is use of tobacco products. And the changes in this were statutory, but also to, we hadn't updated that since kind of the changes in what people are using as tobacco products.
Mhm, right.
And so we wanted to clarify to expand
Mhm.
vaping and those things. Yeah.
I have no comments to this.
And the vaping would include like Juuls or whatever
Yeah.
the kids are using.
Yeah, they have
these days.
electronic smoking devices.
And this applies to any human being on the campus,
Mhm,
visitors,
right. Uh-huh.
anything.
Okay.
Okay. The next one is the personnel file. The changes on this were to add some language that we did not currently have that we were supposed to have in the policy, including the access to records section. And then there were things that we just, we clarified, the removal of records process.
Okay.
Now, the one thing that we added, and this is really something, and I put kind of a comment in for us to consider, but it doesn't come out in the print. On the last page, we have a process, and you all have recently had requests for removal of records, and those have come to the full board in closed session. One of the things that many districts do is they have a panel that reviews those, and they do it with the appeals hearings as opposed to in closed session. So I inserted some of that language for your consideration as to whether you wanted to have a panel do it as opposed to the full board. If not, we'll just delete that.
Which one is that?
It's that last red
page.
paragraph on
Last
page
page.
3 of 5. That,
Oh, 3-5?
I'm sorry, 5 of 5, that
I was
big,
gonna say.
huge, where it starts, the board panel may review the
So
petition.
in the past, when they petitioned to get something removed from their personnel file, we heard it as a full board. Now it'll be a panel of the board, but the panel is final.
Kind of like they do in student discipline. So it's up to you all. We never really had a process for it. We don't have it happen that often. So without the process, we have brought it to the full board. And so when I did some checking, a lot of districts handle it as a panel because, but it's up to you all. We can just leave it for the full board and just cross that right out. I just didn't know how you wanted to handle
I
it.
prefer it come to the full board. You do?
Well, because the panel makes a recommendation to the full board.
No, they don't. It's just
You're
like,
saying we couldn't do
Well-
it that way?
Well, we could take it out that the recommendation of the panel will be brought to the full board for consideration and do it that way. And have it like we do transfers.
Uh-huh.
As opposed to being the final decision. Have the panel bring a recommendation.
Because I know when it's come to the full board, we haven't seen all the information, and I know that when we have like the rebuttal letters and
So-
everything.
it would require a hearing?
It requires a process. And so we did kind of a closed session where we submit on records. Now, this would not necessarily have to be a hearing, but it could be
But the
brought to the
panel would
appeals.
look at the
Yeah,
packet.
correct.
Yeah. Hearing. Currently.
A lot of districts do have an actual hearing where both parties come in. We could do it on papers. I was trying to give options to you all, and this is how most districts do it, but I really
So
wanted
my
to be
only
up for
concern-
discussion.
So my only concern in my 4 years experience is that it has been brought to us in closed session. Rarely, not many at all, maybe 3, 4, under 5. And when it comes to us in closed session, we really don't have a lot of information, but if the panel heard it, maybe we could look
I guess right now.
at all the information before we make a recommendation to the full board that, 3 people looked at it and we're either recommending it to the board or we're not. I don't know.
Well, that's a question I have. Right now, what is submitted even in writing?
When the person requests to have it done, they submit a written request that is submitted to Dr. Burns's office. They're allowed to submit any information they want to with that request.
And to date, we haven't seen any of that.
I
I've
think he
never seen
reviews
that.
it with you.
All they said was a written request. Nobody two that I've had since I've been.
There's no backup to it.
There's no supporting documents.
Okay.
But like, I would like to know why it went in there in the first place.
Mhm.
But I guess that
Like
would,
supporting documents.
this would get you more of that information.
Yeah, this
If we went with this
It's a more
process.
robust process, yeah.
Mhm. I mean, and not a hearing where they have to come in or
Yeah,
anything, but
exactly.
just for the panel
File review.
to
That's-
look
I
at
think
it
it should
and
be
hear,
filed.
okay,
Okay.
why did the letter happen?
I guess,
How long has it been in the file?
So I'll
Mhm.
take out E.
well, you could do it, you could say that they could request a hearing if they want it, right?
Yeah.
We could offer it, but not make it mandatory. So they could either just
Let-
send records, or they could ask for a hearing in person.
And if you did it in a panel, I could bring the investigative notes there and kind of
Right.
walk you through the
Mhm.
process. They can't appeal something going into their file. They can only request that it be removed. So I don't know if they would need to sit down and go through the process, or if we could I could share the investigative notes and saying, here's, because they're a part of that process and they have their side of the story and their.
I would encourage, a rebuttal, their side of the story in the packet for
Sure.
review, but I don't necessarily need them to leave their job in the,
Mhm.
in the, in the middle of the
Mhm.
day or,
Mhm.
the morning to come sit with us, but
But I guess I guess what I would expect is there should already be a rebuttal in the file, right? Because typically, an employee has the right, if they get reprimanded or whatever word you want, to put a rebuttal in their file, correct?
Correct.
Absolutely.
So if then they're asking a year later for it to be removed, you would expect there to be a rebuttal in the file because they didn't believe it should have been there to begin with. Is that not typically what happens?
Very rarely do employees
Really?
write a rebuttal.
Oh, interesting. Okay.
It's
Yeah.
very rare.
And we're going through, I'm just curious, should we have a 12-month policy that anyone can even ask for this? Or an 18 or 24-month policy before a person can ask to have something removed? I just want to throw that out there
Right.
so that we don't
That's not
have,
in here either.
It's not.
so that we don't have someone asking for a removal and it hasn't even been a year yet.
Right. And I guess the other thing is, on the same 5 of 5 you're talking about, so the panel, I think we should just leave. I don't think it should be a whole nother panel appointed by the chairperson. It should be the panel.
The appeals
we
panel
have.
we already
Correct.
have,
Okay,
yeah.
Correct.
Okay.
Yeah.
Because
Um,
we're already scheduled 2 Thursdays a month.
Okay, on
So,
page 1.
Yep.
So we're going to leave in the right to a hearing, and we'll do panel.
And then I'll change that last sentence to the recommendation the panel will be provided to the full board.
The very first sentence, it should say the superintendent or designee, right? Because he doesn't maintain a
Yeah.
personnel file.
and do we want to put anything in there that, that we don't want to hear this if it's been less than 12 months?
Well, doesn't the law say that it has to be invalid, irrelevant, or outdated?
Yeah, the
you
statute
could-
reads, yeah,
So you could say that anything within a 2-year time frame would not be considered outdated.
Did you see anybody's
Mhm.
that had a time frame?
I did
to
not.
remove stuff? You
No,
did
and
not.
I'm,
Do you
I
mind
would-
looking into that?
yeah, I'll look into it.
I like that. I like your
I
recommendation.
don't,
Because
Okay,
there's
go
also the irrelevant component, and I don't know that it's, the
Because-
only provision's not outdated is my only concern.
Because it hasn't been proven that it's been corrected, in my personal opinion. I don't want to hear it if there hasn't been enough time for it to be corrected.
For them to have demonstrated that they have changed their
Demonstration,
behavior.
thank you.
okay.
Can you
Candace.
remind me, why did we remove number 6, health certificate?
Where are we?
Because page 1, health certificates should not be in the section, I'm not
It's in
sure
a
why it
different
was.
section.
Yeah, it's not in the public file, it is in the confidential
If
file.
you go back, it's in a different place because I had the exact same,
If you look at the very top of the second page, health certificates is A.
yes.
Oh.
It should not have been in the first
They mo-
section because
they
it's not
moved
part
it.
of the public file. It actually was both places. I don't know why.
On the bottom of the second page that we were given in the red full paragraph, the
Mhm.
supervisor is expected to use good judgment in determining when a document should be submitted to the file immediately and when a delay is justified. I don't like that.
Okay.
We're allowing judgment. Subjective.
Well, supervisors, when they deal with complaints from an employee. Some things they keep in their own personal file regarding the employee, and some things they send to the central
Okay.
personalized official file. And so that just kind of explains that there is that process by which there may be things that I say to you, you're not going to car rider line like I'm asking you to. And I put that in kind of my file so that if it keeps coming up, I can keep working with you and say, you know, we talked about this on this day, and we talked about this on this day, but I don't want it in your big personnel file because it's not that important.
So it's almost like a strike 1, 2, 3 before it becomes official.
And then if it becomes like a strike 3, then I get a document that says it's happened here, here, and
They
here. So
keep,
it
like, a
encapsulates them all
separate
together.
file on this stuff?
They do. They keep just its documentation so that when it continues to progress, and they can document the date. Now, it is all part of my personnel file as far as my official. So if I request it, it's part of it, but it's not part of the
Permanent file or
big file.
One other example is if I put an employee on an action plan saying I'm giving you 90 days to improve performance, I wouldn't put that action plan into their file until it was over, because there's a lot of changing and adapting that goes on throughout that course of that 3 months. So every time it changed, I would have to change it and send a letter that we changed it. So if I wait till it's all done, then I put it in all at once.
Okay. Any other questions or changes? Okay. So do we want to see this one back again before it goes to the full board?
Well,
or are
this
we-
one's just for review,
Right,
right?
I know, but we pulled stuff in the past to not send it to the full board to see the changes before we've.
Oh, I see
move
what you're
forward.
saying. I
Yes.
see.
I'd like to see them.
We'll
So
table it till
let's
next meeting.
table to next meeting. Okay, nepotism.
Nepotism just was an attempt to make it more
Okay.
robust. And I didn't like the senior staff. I felt need to be broad in that central office or school administrators, because you certainly don't want principals supervising their spouses or girlfriends and boyfriends, and those
Children.
things.
In
Children.
In the first one, an employee who knowingly fails to disclose to the board, or you're missing the or central office
Okay.
and or school administration there.
Sure.
In the full paragraph that begins when recommendations for the selection, that one, the second line, the superintendent shall attempt to avoid. How about just the superintendent shall avoid?
Sure.
In central office, under definitions, just, it should be superintendent, right? Not plural.
Oh, yeah.
And that's all I had.
And Michelle, when it says an employee knowingly fails to disclose, can we put that in the application as well?
I'm sorry.
Number I,
I.
one,
Okay.
Oh, sure, absolutely.
because that's where we see it happen a lot. Is
Application,
that there's
okay.
actually a question there. Are you a family member of someone from Union County
Sure.
Public Schools?
Right. An immediate family, just so everybody looked at the definition of it: wife, husband, sister, brother, step sibling, son, daughter, stepchild, mother, father, step parent, father-in-law, mother-in-law. It includes a lot of people in immediate family.
Yeah, it's about everybody that
And I think
My-
that's good, right?
Yeah.
kin.
That you,
good.
it's really not immediate family. It's more than
No.
that, but
Yeah,
yes,
it's broad.
it's broad.
Now, the only other thing is we don't have,
What?
They would still
Still be a
a
child.
the son or daughter probably.
Yep.
I'm just wondering about it doesn't deal with non-marital live-in type situations.
Significant other, is that what you're
Yeah.
saying?
Yeah, significant other and cohabitation kind of thing.
Yeah, I like,
Because there's folks that don't ever get married.
uh-huh.
Okay,
And
Okay.
cohabitation.
okay.
I'll add
Anyone
that.
have anything else on that one?
Nope.
Okay.
Good catch, Michelle.
3-22, we're just,
The
delete it.
proposal is to delete that because it didn't make sense to me that we have employee travel and expense reimbursement policy and then a reimbursement for
I
conference
know,
costs.
it's weird.
So I just inserted it into the other one.
Okay. So 3-34. I have some questions.
Sure.
In B, what's a division? Each division will be allotted. Each
That
a
is,
department?
no, the departments, I'll use Mr. Strickland as an example. Everything that falls under him, his is the division, facilities department, transportation department, but
Okay.
the operations division.
Okay.
We can capitalize division, yeah.
And the other thing, it should superintendent or designate, because I seriously
yep.
doubt he is right giving
Yeah.
approval for all this stuff. Okay, on the last page, G, something's missing in the last sentence. Shall be the rates established by the board, including.
It's got the, yeah. It should be just the rates established by the board, period. I pulled it from the last one, but we already have the other
Gotcha.
rates elsewhere.
Okay, that was all I had. Anybody else? Nope. Okay. Okay, why are we doing 1-19?
This is an administrative guideline. This is the process that the district uses for the calendar
Who asked
committee.
for this?
Mr. Helms.
Matt Helms?
Yes.
Okay.
And so what we did is we
And
took.
do you know why?
His concern was that, and I thought he had talked about it. His concern was that people in the community didn't know how to get on the calendar committee, what
Okay.
the calendar committee did.
I have lots of questions about that.
Okay. And this is just the process that was already in writing,
Right.
but just
Not
not,
needed. So the committee is made up of, if you go to the,
that should be
Middle
indexed a
of the
different way. I'm
page.
gonna Fix that, sorry.
it's that there should be no bullet right there. The
Yeah, it
committee
needs
is
to be
made up. Okay,
formatted. Yep.
one teacher from each cluster. How are they chosen? How is all these people chosen? One parent from each cluster, 2 high school students. How do we pick these people? 5
Do you know?
principals.
I know that Laura keeps a rotation so that if, say, you're looking at the Monroe cluster and the teacher came 1 year to Monroe High School, the next year they come to elementary, they come to Multiple. So they cycle through all the schools in the cluster.
In each cluster, it's determined that way?
Yes, each cluster. So if you, Laura keeps a,
They were part, okay, so let's take a, so each year, the calendar committee, there are a few clusters. And so the next year, it would be a different set of clusters. It's more than one cluster.
no,
No, all
there's
clusters should be
one
there.
teacher
Oh,
from
that's
every
that's why I'm
cluster.
asking. 'Cause
Yeah, so every year
I
there's
thought-
one teacher from each cluster there. But there are 4 or 5 schools
From
in
each
each
cluster.
cluster.
Right, right.
So they are on a rotation in the Cuthbertson cluster. A different Cuthbertson school each year is used until they all go through the cycle.
Okay. And do they always meet at CATA? The-
Yes.
Okay.
They
So
have
it's-
since I've been
There's
here.
no cluster that's I'm confused by that because I had heard that like it's a different cluster each year.
No, there's one teacher from every cluster each year.
And how about parents?
One parent from each cluster as
One
well.
parent from each cluster as well.
That's the way it
Now-
reads.
I've served on this committee many times, and I thought it rotated clusters each year.
No, it rotates schools in each cluster.
So if you're in you just use Monroe. So if last year it was a Monroe High School, then that's not what I understood either.
Yeah.
Now, there may be people who don't show up once they've been
Mhm.
designated.
So you're saying that all clusters are on the committee every year?
Yes.
The
I'll go
only,
back.
the only position where there's not one from each cluster,
Is the
there's
principals.
2.
So-
High school students and principals, 5 total principals, and they rotate through the clusters for
Maybe
those.
that's what I'm, maybe that's what I'm. thinking,
That's
the
where they
principals
rotate
and
through.
the students.
Correct.
So
But the-
this year's is one cluster's principals?
no, but it's 5 principals from 5 different clusters, but obviously we do these 5, then
And
maybe
then
the next.
Can I make a recommendation?
Yep.
The 2 high school students, why would it not be 9? Why do we all of a sudden go one from every cluster except for high school students and except for principal? And I get you don't want it to be this ginormous thing, but it is weird to say 2 high school students. How do you decide what clusters or what schools those are from? We have 11 high schools. Yeah.
I
Probably
think
by
she
the
does.
principal or
They are
something.
from the same, the high school kids are from 2 different clusters.
Uh-huh.
They're not from the same
Who picks
cluster.
them?
The principal in that cluster. So Laura does the same cycle of high school students, so the same school doesn't come 2 years in a row.
Okay, that's confusing too, because I know the high school students that were there a week or so ago, and their
Yeah.
principal was not there. So
No, but
you're
the-
saying
The
that it
principal
matches?
chooses them. It doesn't match.
This is,
Principal may not be there.
But the principal
Okay.
identifies
It is
the,
So we have
Complicated.
nine, so that's 18 between each parent and each teacher.
Correct.
And now we dropped to 5 principals instead of 9, which I don't even understand that.
Why don't we have a principal from every cluster?
I
We
agree
can.
with
we can
that.
change that.
That needs to
And
be.
why don't we have one high school student from every cluster?
He's like, we're
Well,
talking 40 people now, but not everybody's going to show
Right.
up, and at least everybody's
At
represented.
least make
I
the
know we're,
attempt to invite and be represented, but
to be honest with you, I don't have a problem with the principals rotating so that they're not all away from their campuses at the same time for, for,
they're after school though, right? The meetings.
well, they have sports and stuff after school and stuff that they're planning for and activities on their campus.
But it could be elementary and middle too, right? Principals,
Yeah,
because it's
absolutely.
just
Mhm.
principals
just a representative from every
at each
cluster.
cluster.
And it does say that each academic level, elementary, middle, and high, has to be represented. And then I did recommend adding, and I did the one principal from a Title I school.
Well, there is no problem with saying that we'll have 9 teachers, 9 parents, 9 students, and 9 principals. There's no problem with adding that to that
Okay.
group. It is going to make that group, but we talked about maybe streamlining some of that whole process anyway, because getting 40 people to
On the same day.
mesh on the same thing on the same day may be difficult, but
But
we've
at
got
least they
some
can
other-
participate.
Sure.
and-
And the other idea from a practical, I have a student advisory council that I meet
Oh.
with 4 times a year, and they're all high school seniors. And I'm not saying that they all be part of the committee, but I'm saying that they're part of the agenda on my fall meeting could be a feedback session on the school calendar and see what their thoughts were.
You know, what I could do is instead of having
an idea.
students on this committee, I could come to that committee and present the questions in the calendar, get their answers, and bring that to the whole committee.
Chances are, and I'm just throwing this out as a parent of a high school student, part of it could be is that maybe the principals are choosing some of a handful of students to participate on the superintendent's council and providing someone else an opportunity to serve on, that way,
How do they get picked? for your
students are
council?
getting
Principals do
opportunity.
it?
You know what I'm saying? So it's not the same student getting all the opportunities. I don't know.
Okay, you can explore that.
Because I know that one of the students that's serving on the calendar committee is not on the superintendent panel. So
That's good.
Okay.
Okay, and the 1, 2, 3 up above, the 1, 2, 3, 4th bullet, total number of work. Oh no, I'm sorry. Where am I? First bullet, a minimum of 185 days or 1,025 hours covering no less. That's for students to be in school.
Correct.
Can we add
That's the-
that in there somewhere?
Well, that's what the actual school calendar, that's the school calendar law, and that's the language of that.
Okay.
It says that's what
Because
the,
then you get to work days
right,
and the 195 days.
yeah.
It's
So you
also,
want a minimum of 185 student days? Or, okay, we can do that.
and then with the 10 holidays and the 10 annual leave days, that's how the 195 for
gets
teachers gets to 250.
Right.
Okay.
do we
Oh.
want to include the state statute somewhere on here so people know that this isn't our?
No, it
Guideline-
says North Carolina law required.
And the
So-
statute is
so I
referenced
was-
in the actual policy. This is just an
This
admin
is a
guideline.
guideline.
Yeah,
Okay,
is
this is a
policy.
guideline.
Yeah.
Okay,
And the policy
So-
references the statute.
okay.
So
And it doesn't even actually be in the guideline. I just threw it in there again.
I looked at 1-19 and all 119 says is the superintendent has to provide a school calendar for the next
Mhm.
calendar year to the school board by
February 15th.
February 15th.
Yeah.
Here's my question, the half days. Last year, we didn't tell people about half days till after we approved
The
the
calendar.
calendar. A lot of parents were very confused. In fact, when we put out half days on Facebook this year, I had a couple parents that like, what are you talking about? I have a calendar from February and there's no half days on it. So is there any way that
I've asked Dr. Barnes that whenever this comes to the full board, that if we're going to do half days or not, that's fully vetted,
That it's on
communicated,
there.
and it's
Right.
on there.
I know that both of us on our Facebook pages back in February or January when we approved the calendar for
Mhm.
this year, we said these don't include half days.
That's correct.
But it would be way better if we could do it all
Then
at
I
the same
think
time.
we had to come back at a later
We
time
did,
to make
yeah.
And
that adjustment.
republish one.
And I know part
Yeah.
of that was just getting with the staff, the schools and making sure that the half days work, but it would be better to do it all at one time.
And it's
So that-
never been a problem before. This was the first time in my experience that we didn't publish
Yeah.
We
the
did not.
calendar
That
with
would-
the
yeah.
half days.
Yep.
So,
I think we had issues with testing and professional development stuff, and that's why it was delayed.
sure.
But this year, if possible, I've asked Dr.
Okay.
Barnes to make sure that
Yeah. And Brad and I
when it
have already
comes to the full
coordinated.
board, that we,
It'll have it.
if
So-
we're having it, that it's part of that
Good.
public.
In this administrative guideline, should it speak to the half days and the fact that the chief academic office determines the half days in conjunction with the superintendent or something like this? But there's nothing in here about the half days, right?
You know, this was just I'm sorry, this was just the committee itself. It wasn't necessarily
Okay.
the full calendar. Now, we certainly can add, or we could add, we could look at, we could say this process continues till the calendar committee has reached a consensus on the proposed calendar, including bank or early release days or.
Yeah.
Yeah, early release
Something like
days.
that.
And last year, there was a difficulty in getting those from the academic office, but Brad and I have already talked this year, and we've talked about a couple of ideas. One of the things we talked about was that we had those 2 extra work days still to place.
Right. Mhm.
Maybe the possibility of doing those instead of doing half days, because I know that half days are kind of a burden for a lot of folks. So that's one of the things we talked
It
about.
is. The community is not in favor of those. It really messes up family schedules and transportation and.
I've asked that we evaluate the return on investment that we're getting with half days.
Thank you. Appreciate that. Okay, next, administrative guidelines for employee candidates 3-3.
Yeah, I told you at the last meeting I would bring this one because we're now making sure that you get any administrative guidelines that go with the policy at the same time. So we made some revisions to this one that are consistent with the policy that you all are having go to the board. Now, we wanted to adopt the EEOC criteria, which is I look at the specific offense and the specific job requirements and make sure that the crime impacts that job requirement. However, I also wanted to continue to have those things that I know y'all were concerned about removing some of those things like any felony offense. And while we're going to continue to be looking at these, they are going to be considerations for exclusions instead of outright exclusions. And that's more consistent with what the EEOC says. But I didn't want to take those out completely because we obviously wanted those to be things that were of heightened concern and it allowed employees to know.
Okay.
I have a question.
Sure.
Second bullet, any misdemeanor within the last 5 years, 2 within the last 10. Then you go to the next bullet, 3 misdemeanors older than 12. So what about 11? I know the EEOC is not always consistent on
Right.
stuff. but-
And this is what the administration had adopted. I think that they this
Okay.
was something before my time.
The other thing is the footnote is the volunteer application. I asked Michelle, there's a couple other places in earlier where she had inserted stuff about volunteers, but if I'm a volunteer, I'm not going to look in the personnel section of our thing. So we really need to develop a policy on volunteers that talks about the getting to be an approved volunteer and, drugs and smoking and all the stuff that we
Correct.
talk to employees about needs to be kind of in the same policy. Do you guys agree with that? Like that we need.
I didn't realize we don't have the volunteer.
We don't
Well,
have
we
a
have the
policy
visit-
policy specifically. We have a visitors to campus
Yes.
policy. But my thought is we could do a volunteer policy and it'll still probably fall under the personnel one, but it'll be entitled volunteers so people can find it easier. And what it may do is it may not say you can't smoke on campus, but it'll say all policies for employees apply to volunteers, including
Right.
tobacco, drug-free.
Because I don't
those
think
kinds
I
of
would
things.
go to
Employees.
a personnel
Yeah.
thing to read it to say, oh, like it was in one that we took off. For
The drug
today.
testing,
The drug
correct.
testing. It
Yeah.
talks about that volunteers in there, which is a great thing, but unless I wouldn't look in there if I was a volunteer.
I think some place that lists all the things that employees are required to do. With us,
Volunteers, you mean? Yeah. Okay. So that's something we can work on in the future, but I
Yeah.
don't have any other questions.
I'll try
on
and
that
have that for the next
Okay.
one. Okay, so
committee meeting.
Uh-huh.
Right.
Mhm.
So first I need a motion to send to the board for first review 3-2C, 3-5A, 3-13, 3-22, and 3-34.
So moved.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Okay, then I need a motion to send the administrative guidelines for review to the board, 1-19 and 3-3.
So moved.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Okay, number 7 is discussion regarding drug testing of student athletes and those involved in extracurricular activity. And this is coming, we talked about it a couple months ago, I believe, and it's coming again from Mr. Sides, about a discussion about drug testing of student athletes and those involved in extracurricular activities. I'd like to just kind of have an open discussion about whether or not this isn't for action, whether or not we should continue to pursue this. If there's something else that's out there, I would like to talk about the pros and cons of it. I will say that Mrs. Merrill and I attended a law conference for the NCSB 2 weeks ago now.
2 weeks.
And there was a small discussion on drug testing. The NCSB seems to think that it's kind of gone away, that it was big 10 or 15 years ago, but people aren't doing it anymore. We did talk to a board member of a county that is currently doing it, or of a school system that's currently doing it. And theirs is fairly new, and it was basically, maybe you should just take a couple minutes to think about it before you do it, or see what our program, what happens out of that. We did hear that the cost of doing it is between $10,000 and $15,000 per school. So if we did all the middle schools and all the high schools, we would be talking about $200,000 to $300,000 a year.
And that was their cost, and their school district is significantly smaller than ours.
So, and that's just testing marijuana, cocaine, amphetamines, PCP, and opioids.
Mm-hmm.
That doesn't include it would be a different test for steroids and things of that sort, correct?
That is correct. It would be a different panel
Okay.
of testing.
So that would be more expensive. And I'm not sure that that includes, so if you put in a policy, and correct me where I'm wrong, it wouldn't be punitive to the student. It would be something that we're trying to help with the drug usage on campus. So they would, you could see a policy where the first offense was some sort of treatment or some sort of counseling or something like that. I don't believe the $10,000 to $15,000 includes counseling and things of that sort, correct?
That's just the testing piece.
So we would have to lay the cost of that on top of that.
That's right.
Okay. And the gentleman that we talked to mentioned things outside of drug testing, like counseling, drug counseling in the schools instead of drug testing kind of thing. But I just wanted to relay that conversation that we had.
More prevention-based.
Prevention-based, thank you.
That is correct. And having, spending that amount of money on testing, you could have good prevention in schools, education programs, making sure that we educate athletes, students who drive on campus. We could look at it from that aspect also.
And then we could educate the adults as well, the coaches and
What to look for.
and the staff advisors and stuff of what to look for.
That is correct.
And I think that, we have a really great thing with the sheriff's department and the local police officers and the drug dogs that come in and stuff. That's really cut back on, my understanding, it's had a great deterrent effect to the students.
And now we're allowing the dogs into the schools,
Right.
That is
not just the
correct.
parking lots.
The-
And
the-
that helps.
The Safe Schools Initiative has been successful. Sheriff Kathy, Chief Gilliard, and all the law enforcement agencies, the drug dogs have been on campus more. That is a great deterrent. We do have to make sure when a student is caught, if they ask for help, we got to decide what we want to do when it comes to the counseling piece of that from the school system perspective.
And I think that this year we've added the social and emotional learning aspect to the school systems. And I'm hoping that with the mental health and the social workers and the guidance department kind of free of those other two areas a little bit, that drugs and the conversations surrounding them with students will be a little bit easier to have.
It should be a little bit easier to have those conversations, but I do want to remind the board that when you think about kind of where we are today compared to where we were this time last year with the additional social workers and mental health, that is just a dent in terms of what we need.
Right.
And if we'll just remember, we had developed a 3-year plan to add additional resources, and we're in year 1 of that. So I think even adding those positions will help with the conversation, but we're still not where we need to be ideally.
And I understand. Yeah.
But and that will be something we continue to push forward on. But yes.
But maybe instead of the 200,000 or 300,000 for drug testing, the conversation should include a discussion about whether or not that money might be better for preventative things like a drug counselor or two in the school systems that go to each of the high school and middle schools and talk about that. I don't know.
Or even, starting as early as elementary school to talk about. I know some of our schools have that kind of educational courses and some don't. They have DARE, right?
Yeah. I think we need DARE back in the schools.
Well, in years ago, we had the Safe and Drug-Free Schools Department. That was a grant funding that we got 5 to 7 years ago. That went away. So that did some of that. It was about education, prevention, making sure we had speakers on campus that told the effects of drugs and drug use. So.
And I know that the last year we had the whole forums on the opioid crisis and stuff like that. And then I saw that Weddington High School is holding a thing on vaping next month, right? Well, next month is tomorrow, but somewhere in the next couple weeks. So we are trying to get it out to parents and students alike about that kind of stuff. But
from the research I've done on drug testing of students, the evidence is not there for me personally that this prevents drugs in our schools, whatever. It's kind of like a recent conversation to having metal detectors in the schools. Having metal detectors is not going to prevent, it's not a 100% guarantee that it's going to remove everything from the school. So, and I don't think drug testing necessarily will either, based on the research that I have done. I don't know if anyone else wants to comment.
I would agree with that. In fact, the U.S. Department of Education has said that it's done nothing to reduce substantially the substance abuse in the schools. So again, if we could do some research and find something I mean, I don't want to not do anything for the drug crisis, but I'm not sure.
I think the sheriff and the police department are already in there, going through the schools. That's wonderful. We've got the social and emotional aspect where we're adding mental health therapists, we're adding guidance counselors, we're partnering with the county so that if a student does need help, we're putting that in place over a 3-year plan. I think that's where the money is better spent. So I would just encourage us to continue doing that rather than, spending money on random drug testing.
And I would encourage Dr. Houlihan and you, Mr. McCraw, to continue to have conversations with those police and law enforcement that if they think at some point that it would help the school system to do drug testing of athletes or extracurricular, that we would have that discussion as well.
And I just want to go on the record. The board member that we spoke to at the law conference was not convincing that this is money we need to be spending in our school district. And he pretty much communicated, he said, before you do this, he said, why don't you wait a year or more and see how this truly works out for us.
I think this conversation falls directly in line with the conversation we started last year around school safety. And the board was very supportive as a budget priority to look at funding school safety as a number 1 or number 1A initiative from last year's budget. And even though it didn't get funded that way, it's through the county, we still have made some strides. And this conversation is going to continue to be part of that ongoing budget requests for the future years, including things around like anti-bullying programs for the school system. And so this can all fall into kind of community education and proactive prevention as an expense.
I agree. I think we need to continue to have conversations like this to see what ways we can help. I mean, the pros of a drug testing are deterrent effects. Is they think that the kids are be deterred from the peer pressure of using drugs. If there's
Or being kicked off a team.
right, if there's ways that we can do stuff differently, then that's great. But I like having the conversations surrounding it just to see where we need to go with it. Do you disagree with that?
No, I agree with that totally.
Okay.
I think we need to focus on prevention in our schools.
Okay.
Education of our students. Last year's programs were community forums. Most everybody that came said we need to start focusing on student forums and get away from the
I
community.
agree with that. The forum that I went to at Porter Ridge was awesome, but I think more students should go to it. I wish that we would have a
Could it not be included in
School
PE or
curriculum, yeah.
health and?
I mean, it was
Fitness.
interesting.
Good.
It really
Our-
was.
Yeah, I think we need to
was
just
like a
ramp
Scared
it up
Straight
in our
program
PE
kind of
and health,
Yeah.
our health curriculum. The last thing that, and I know that we've spoken about a particular issue with one of our students in schools last year. If we are going to have professional development, if we choose to continue doing half days or professional development and half days for our staff, I would encourage that we do warning signs and things to look for with our teachers and our administrators and our coaches. And maybe even with our coaches, making it mandatory. If you see this in an athlete, we tell our kids, see something, say something. Maybe we need to tell our coaches the same thing. If you see something, say something. I don't care if you're going to the state championship or not going to the state championship. If there's a kid that needs help, say something.
Correct.
We need to get that child help.
So I, because we don't want to go down the road we went last year.
Well,
And so I just want to say, if we choose to do professional development in half days, let's include our coaches and stuff in there on what to look for to help our students.
I agree with that. And one of the items, I actually will expand that thought to not include just coaches, but all school-based staff.
She said
And I
all
said
staff.
administrators, teachers.
I agree with that.
One of the things that I realized last year as a gap in our system, and we've worked to fix it, we had never trained teachers and adults in our building about the signs that you're speaking of, or even signs of suicide. And we have developed under Mr. McGraw's leadership, we've worked with some folks to develop a suicide intervention training manual.
Okay.
And when our new county social workers and our other existing UCPS funded social workers are on board, we're going to go through a massive kind of train the trainer module.
Wonderful.
But then they can go to their schools that they serve and train teachers and staff. That's going to happen this year.
Okay.
yes.
Great.
So I
That will
just,
be something new.
yeah,
Okay.
just make sure all of the adults, whether our coaches are teachers or not, just include them so they can, because they're spending the most time with our kids,
And
on activity buses,
And
practice.
coming from a college of education as a teacher, you don't have a class like that.
Right.
And I
It's
do
easy-
think, go ahead. yeah.
It's easy to take for granted that people recognize the signs of drug use. We've trained our parents with community forums, but we have to make sure we focus on employees because some people just don't recognize drug use, alcohol use,
Right.
those signs.
Steroids.
That is
I
correct.
want to cover all the
Right,
bases.
and
Yeah.
maybe
All
coaches
drugs.
are different because we do have some coaches that are not employees of the
Mhm.
school system too. So we would have
We
a
need to
separate thing
include
because
them.
that includes a little bit different things than.
And I know Mr. Jones has annual training with the
That's awesome.
non-faculty coaches, so we could cover that at one of
Yes.
those meetings as
That'd be
well.
great.
So
Yeah, we have-
Definitely.
we have an employee on site that does our drug education class already.
Uh-huh.
She is versed in that, so she
Okay.
has some expertise in
Oh,
that.
great.
Okay,
So-
great.
Yeah.
Yeah, we have mandatory training every year that all of our coaches on concussions, and it certainly could be folded in.
I'm
sure there's-
at the beginning of the year.
Yeah,
Yeah,
I'm-
CATA doing concussion.
I'm sure there's
training, so
online modules even
Okay.
that we could send
That
our
would be
coaches.
awesome. That would be great. Okay, does anyone else have anything?
Thank Candace.
I need to retract. So the community forums are listed amongst the community or just?
Clusters.
Yes, Ms. Sturtevant, we did them at every cluster last year except Sun Valley. And I was kind of waiting till football season geared down a little bit because we did them on Thursday night, I think last year. No, I'm sorry, Tuesday nights. We want to do Sun Valley, but then we want to have more student-focused forums rather than
right.
community-based. You attended several of them. They're good forums. We had law enforcement. We had members of the mental health community. We had an addiction survivor on the panel. And we had good attendance at some it was a little, it was down. We wish there would have been more people, but we did offer it at every cluster except Sun Valley last year. We have,
Yeah, Facebook, Twitter.
website, Tahira
But you
helped
know
us
what
out.
we
That I
didn't
missed?
do? We didn't stream it live.
did
Like if
not.
I couldn't get there, I mean, like Facebook Live or something to watch
I
it.
think and what I didn't understand when I went to it last year was that how much it would have been better if I had brought my daughter with me, because the kids should really see it. It's eye-opening.
Or, even if we don't do it live, record one
Right,
and because it was a repeat at
right.
every, I wish we had that recorded so that parents could, or students could go on it and watch
Well, I
it.
hope we get to do Sun Valley and then we can see
Record
everybody
it.
who did and record it and see everybody who didn't go come to it. But it's hard during sports season to get kids
Well,
there.
we just didn't want people
I know.
not to be able
To
to
not be
come
there.
just because of athletics. We want to wait till it turns down a little bit toward the winter time. So
And like you brought up the vaping thing that's going to be happening at
At Weddington
Weddington.
High School.
Now, I'm assuming that that's not going to be at all clusters. So
No,
when you
ma'am.
have a situation like that, could that not be recorded so that, let's say, someone in the Piedmont cluster or the Parkwood cluster said, wants to, hear what was said, but can't get all the way over to Weddington
we could.
to hear that discussion?
Weddington's is on the 13th of November at 6:30 p.m. in their auditorium.
So I think it would be wonderful if that could be recorded so that we could advertise it and put it on our YouTube archives so that people can refer to it. Even a year later, let's say a parent is struggling or they find out their kid is, vaping or something, they can, go on there and look at it no matter how long ago it was.
That goes right in line with our safety training now. It's all online. You can view it when it's convenient for you.
Yes.
So I think it's a good
Or when
idea.
it becomes a crisis for, that family or whatever, they can find that resource.
November 13th, 6
November
p.m.
13th, 6:30 p.m. The auditorium at Weddington High. Okay, that was a good discussion. The next meeting of this committee is going to be on Wednesday, November 28th at 9 a.m. That's when we're scheduled for, so we'll put that on our calendar. And I need a motion now to go into closed session to consult with our attorney in order to preserve the attorney-client privilege between the attorney and the public body, which privilege is hereby acknowledged pursuant to NCGS 143-318.11, Section A, subsection 3.
So moved.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.